Namaste, everyone. Today, we're going to go over Complicating the Image of the Model Minority Success, a review of Southeast Asian American Education by Bic Ngo and Stacey J. Lee. I'm Professor Bond, and I'll guide you through this lecture. Let me take myself out of here, and there you go. Hopefully it just goes. Okay. Learning objectives today is you're going to learn the status of Southeast Asian American education. You're going to learn about the model minority myth, and you're going to review the Southeast Asian American education. What is the model minority myth? Well, it's this pernicious belief that all Asians are doing well. All Asians are rich, all Asians are going to Harvard, all Asians have no problems and are just these wonderful success story robots. Well, that's actually not true. So we have, on the one hand, on the aggregate, Asian Americans do lead the nation in bachelor degrees. If you look here at the 53%, that is true. And their share of poverty is 2.3%. I really want to question that number just because there's such a large undocumented population that's not actually aggregated into this number, as well as a large Asian Americans who do not fill out the census. Remember, this is all census data. But even looking at the census data, and a large proportion of Asian Americans do not fill out the census. They don't speak the language, and they also have the fear of the government. So you're talking about the model minority. All Asians are doing great. They're all just wonderful, nerds. Actually, if you look at Hmong American, we got 19.8% bachelor's degree. That is smaller than the other American average, which is 28%. And if you look at the share of poverty of children, I very importantly like to emphasize that because children go to school. Those school children are their next generation to college. You have 29 or almost 30%. 1 in 3 Hmong babies are in poverty and they don't have enough to eat, which means that affects their education. Now, if you look at the Lao Americans, you have 16% graduation rate or bachelor's degree. That's lower than Hmong. And you have 1 in 5 Lao babies who are in poverty, who don't have enough to eat. These are startling numbers, and they go against the false narrative of the model minority myth. Cambodian, you have 18.3% graduation rate, and you have 16% children in poverty. I'm going to question this number just because I know it's much higher. But again, you're talking about populations who do not fill out the census, right? So people who do fill out the census are people who are more educated, right? But the mass majority don't, okay? So this number, I really question that. I really want to say it's much higher, maybe 1 in 3, similar to Hmong Lao. Now, if you look at Filipino, you have 48% graduation rate, right, which is high. And again, something to look at if you're looking at Filipino numbers, actually the second generation is doing worse than the first generation. The first generation came over with their BA from the Philippines, right? Their children are not getting the same rate of bachelor. So that's something to be alert about, right? Look at Vietnamese, 29%. Again, these numbers are incorrect, not exactly, as Vietnamese third wave are not doing as well as the first elite wave that came. And those are the most likely to actually fill out the census. The model minority myth is not real. The APA or Asian Pacific Americans, they're used as a sword, right? And they didn't want to do this, but people use them as a sword to injure other people of color, particularly African Americans, right? And Poon has a really great article on this, right? It's actually, the model minority is not invented by Asian Americans. It's not even pushed by Asian Americans. People push Asian Americans, a small slither of alt-right Asian Americans who are in particular Chinese, post-2000 immigrants from mainland China. Majority of Chinese are actually very much for affirmative action, but you have this like new immigrant group that's alt-right that are for that. And again, this is kind of the divide and conquer technique. Oh, Asian Americans are doing great. Oh, other minorities. Oh, what's wrong with you, right? Again, Asian Americans have never said they are doing great, okay? And again, this is a false narrative, model minority that is pushed upon, and it's very much to divide and conquer. So the authors are Bic Ngo, a professor at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and Stacey Lee, which is professor at University of Wisconsin. Excellent. So let's look at Southeast Asian versus Asian American discourse of success. They start the quote with, Southeast Asian Americans, Vietnamese Americans, Hmong Americans, Cambodian Americans, and Lao Americans occupy a unique position in relation to the discourse on Asian American success. On one hand, they're positioned inside this discourse and viewed as hardworking, high achievers. But on the other hand, they're positioned at the other pole outside the discourse as of success and portrayed as high school dropouts, gangsters, and welfare dependents. So you see, Asian Americans can never win. They're either the yellow peril, right, which is like more how Southeast Asians are viewed, versus the model minority, right, which is how others, East Asians in particular, are viewed. And again, those are both two extremes. Not correct, not the true story. Now, the background. All these ethnic groups came from Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. They all came as refugees, not as immigrants, not as immigrants. I always, when I lecture this in class, students are like, what? I didn't come here voluntarily? No, your parents ran for your life, okay? No, we did not come here as immigrants. We came here as refugees. Let's look at Vietnamese Americans. Some are very successful in school, not all. In fact, there's a large, undeniable, large number of Vietnamese who are not doing well in school. So this section talks about the bridges. Why are some of them doing so well? Well, we have the first wave of Vietnamese who are doing very well, but they came in elite themselves, right? So they're just reproducing what they had in Vietnam. They have also the second and third wave did not do that great. So one of the other bridges are Buddhist, Confucian traditional beliefs, Vietnamese family lifestyle, family bonds, and obligations. You have to do well. Now, there's lots of barriers like alienation, gangs, poverty, and just being a cultural broker for your family all the time can be very, very taxing. Now, according to Zhao and Bankston, the highest rate of delinquencies occur within the second generation. Those low-achieving delinquent youth are described as having lost their culture. There's a great book here by Kevin Lam, Youth Gangs, Racism and Schooling, Vietnamese Youth in a Concept, Post-Colonial Concept. It's about gangs, Vietnamese gangs. Let's focus on Hmong Americans. 50% of Fresno State students, of the Southeast Asian students, are Hmong of descent. Now, they're refugees from the Secret War from Laos, 1970s onward to now. The bridges are they have very much been improving their graduation rates. Definitely Hmong women are leading the way. Woohoo! Okay, they're very much killing it, doing very well. Even Hmong women who actually had multiple children are coming back to school, and after their children are growing up or while they're growing up, are going back to college. So it's a massive success story in many ways. But again, Hmong American is still a very relatively low graduation rate, but still very much improving. Now, other bridges are being bicultural, and also you're Hmong and American, so you know both cultures. Also, among the quote, this is a quote from the chapter, among the poor have the higher graduations and lower levels of problem behavior in school than non-Hmong poor. So basically what the quote is saying that the Hmong in some underprivileged circumstances actually do better than other underprivileged in terms of they get a better GPA, etc. Now, barriers. Takaki talks about how they come from an oral tradition. This is like more first generation, so it's not really applicable now. In some ways it is, but in some ways it's, we're on our third generation now. Gender roles, preferred learning styles, sometimes they like group learning, early marriage, early childbirth. Hmong parents face linguistic and cultural barriers, right? They can't help their kids sometimes. Racism, poverty, high dropout rate, lots of intergenerational issues and conflicts in the family. So these are two books I'd highly like to recommend to you. A Hmong Wedding Story by Mai Moa, and also The Latecomer, a Hmong Family Memoir by Kao Yang. And great books if you want to delve deep in the Hmong American life, particularly Hmong American female life. Cambodian American Education. You know, the first wave, Cambodian, this is a very touchy subject because Cambodia had a massive genocide. Pol Pot came. He was a dictator and he murdered anyone who was educated. And he murdered a huge amount, swaths of Cambodians, unfortunately. They came here running from their lives, from the genocide. Obviously, lots and lots of trauma. And the elite first wave came 75, and then the second and third came 80, 83, and we have more recent waves. So they have a lot of barriers. There's intergenerational trauma, there's parental differences, there's gangs, poverty, illiteracy, gangs again, dropout rates, especially women, which is unusual, truancy, jail, and now deportation. Those are massive barriers to education. Now, Bridges is, if you look in Long Beach, there's the Khmer Girls in Action. There's clubs, there's siblings help, there's parental activism, there's middle class Cambodians live in better school districts, so they do better. There's resilience, there's religion, right? And there's culturally relevant classes, right? And one book that we're going to read is Unsettled by Eric Tang that talks about this Cambodian American situation. Lao American. Now came here also because of the Southeast Asian wars and pushed into Lao refugee camp, they were actually pushed into America and they became Lao refugees, and they're pushed into low paying and unskilled employment, according to DeVoe. And they have several bridges though, in terms of academic success. Highly successful in school. Some do really great and they attribute to cultural values, family life. And there are also barriers. There's gangs, there's gender and cultural norms. There's family conflicts that lead to living away from parents. There's American adolescents who do not have much of a social life and have few friends, quoted by Bic Ngo. And teachers are not culturally competent. So those are all barriers to allow American success. So now we're at the end, learning outcomes. So today you learned about Southeast Asian American education, you learned about the model minority myth, and we reviewed the article on Southeast Asian American education, a literature review. If you have any questions, please stop by and shoot me an email.